am very glad to be back at some capacity, and I think this is perfect video to come back with. Since I started doing YouTube on documenting my learnings on Blender, my life has slightly changed. I have recently been employed as a 3D designer, and it may or may not be partially because of what I have learned in the last 9 months. So why did I start learning Blender in the first place? Just to give a little context to you, it is late 2022, somewhere between October and November, and I had just quit my job in architecture, feeling low and quite emptied. Later, I found out that the company went bankrupt anyway. During this time, finding what to do next, because I didn't want to go back into architecture, I thought I need to throw myself into something, learn something new, and Blender came to my attention. I started my journey first time in November 2022. Over this time, I have used only Blender 3.4 version. Just a quick disclaimer, I am not declaring to be an expert on Blender. This is just my personal journey of learning Blender and what have I created in the last 9 months. The world of Blender is huge and there are still a lot for me to learn, but I have learned basics, I would say, and today I will be sharing that with you. I have gone down this memory lane and compiled all the projects that I have created as well as tutorials that I have followed and what I have learned from that. So without waiting much longer, let's get into this video. And as many people, let's get to the first little project that I did, which was donut tutorials. I hear what you are saying. Oh, it's so boring to repeat it, or you might not follow any tutorials at all and just went on this Blender journey by yourself. But one thing I can say, it is a really good tutorial series if you really want to have a good workflow. You might be bored of all the donuts shared on social media, but it truly teaches you the best practices. I have done all sorts of 3D modeling for past 10 years, mainly architectural modeling, which is a different kind of beast. Not a single tutorial for absolute beginners stands up to almighty donut tutorials in my opinion. This is final result that I did share on Instagram and YouTube, as I really wanted to share my whole journey, how I started with my learnings on Blender. You can also follow me on my Instagram account 3D by Ellie, or subscribe to my YouTube channel to see my whole journey. I will attempt to post twice a month, and later in the video I will tell you exactly why I can't come back to weekly videos just yet. But continuing with the project timeline, next project that I did was this rolling macaroon. This was a way to solidify my first learnings from donut tutorials. I still went back to a few tutorials to make sure I remember how to do certain things, like distributing instances by using geometry nodes. At this stage, I didn't know much about polygon count or how to optimize models for rendering quicker, but I did enjoy creating this animation nonetheless. This animation also got around 400 views in first hours, which took me by surprise. At this point, there were few things catching my attention in terms of what to learn next. And things like water and smoke simulations were high on that list, so I decided to explore that next. I tried out different tutorials for it, but nothing really stuck well with me. I found these simulations to be quite complicated at the time, as well as confusing. I probably will revisit it later in my Blender journey, but I just tried out this as a little test at the end of 2022. I started to post on my journey on Instagram quite regularly, and quickly my interest was drawn to ISO rooms that appeared in my explore page. I will leave a few inspirations in my video description that moved me towards that path to create isometric room scenes. The next stop, cozy bedroom. After I finished with macaroon and smoke tests, I already were hooked on these ISO rooms that I have seen on Instagram. I was ready to start modeling in this direction. I already had some knowledge in terms of architectural modeling, so it seemed only to be fitting to combine my already existing knowledge with the new Blender modeling knowledge. So I started with low poly bedroom scene. This was my first space modeling attempt. I didn't know a lot about mesh modeling at this point, and I was using bevel to make round corners. This is also a first long-form video on my YouTube channel where I show the modeling process of this scene. You can find it in the speed modeling playlist. I will leave the link in the description for it. But continuing with the timeline, I decided to try my hand out in animation through keyframing objects. I thought I will try out some product motion graphics as it has interested me for a while. From this project, I started to introduce objectives of every project that I am making to learn something new. And the objective for AeroPress project was to explore the product motion graphics, explore keyframing, animation, and build different scenes, as well as think about transitions from scene to scene. I spent days building different scenes for different shots of the so-called AeroPress advert. Knowing how little I knew about polygon modeling, I am surprised I even got to this level. I learned a lot from this project. New things were discovered in this process as well, but it was time to go back to some tutorials to learn a little bit more about the processes that I was doing unintentionally. I discovered loop tools around this time, which has helped a lot from this point on in my modeling journey. I have made a video where I reviewed this add-on as well. You can leave me a comment if you have any add-ons you would like me to review. And I decided to go back to the Blender guru himself and go through Anvil tutorials. So I went back to Blender Guru and went through Anvil tutorials, which are slightly outdated, but it still gave me a lot of new knowledge. This is a moment when I really started to learn more in depth about the principles of mesh topology, UV unwrapping, material building to achieve photorealistic materials. These tutorials are great if you want to learn how to think about model optimization. From this tutorial, I also finally learned how to use subdivision modifier in best practices. And pretty much since this tutorial, I have been using subdivision modifier on all of the models that I have created so far. And after these tutorials, I decided to come back to ISO rooms. As I enjoyed the first ISO room, I thought I will come back to another ISO room with the new found knowledge. And this time I started with the most complicated model of the room, which was freestanding roll-top bath. After Anvil tutorial, I had a sense that I have a bit better understanding on what I am doing, and I felt that I understood how to do a bit more complex modeling, but still keep it to low poly by the definition. Here are some wire mesh images of the bath model that I created. I find it looks really nice and clean in terms of the mesh topology. So the next thing I had to do is build a room around it. Following the bath model, I came up with idea for a round bathroom that I updated and modeled in the process. I used a lot of separate selection shortcut to make sure that all the furniture that I create fits within the space. This is a time when I was still rendering with Eevee. In this project I also discovered hair particle systems, but I didn't dive too much into it. I enjoyed creating this scene. I feel like I learned a lot from this, especially how to make bespoke furniture pieces. At this stage, I was a little bit confused about the direction I want to go with my Blender learnings, so I jumped on the next isometric scene as I didn't know what other thing I should do. I was a little bit lost with my learning journey on Blender at this point when I was doing this project, and I was wondering a lot if my skills will come to fruition. I was a little bit confused with what I wanted to do for my full-time job as well. Didn't want to go back to architecture, so I was thinking how to get into other spheres of design, and I applied for a lot of different jobs in this time. I was also interested in environmental modeling as it seemed to be a little bit closer to architecture, and I could use my pre-existing knowledge to fast-track my learnings in Blender. From this project, I sort of took a little dip into environmental modeling, and I thought I will try out my next project to be more exterior scene. For this project, big inspiration was Sweeper3D on Instagram. I will leave his credentials down in the video description. You can go and check out his Instagram. On this project, I learned a lot about creating image references that can be placed in a background, as well as how to use images to recreate leaves on trees and how to use particle systems to distribute them. The end result wasn't really what I wanted it to be, but I learned something from this. After finishing this project, I thought I would like to try some architectural visualization in Blender. I just have switched from Eevee to Cycles as I have discovered settings to be able to render faster with Cycles. This was a time when I started multiple projects that I didn't really finish. This was a really short project as Easter was just around the corner and I wanted to pop on platforms just to say hi as I was silent for some time. I did learn a little bit about hair particles on this little project. I was going to quite a few interviews at this time as well, so I was a little bit distracted with projects at this period of time, but I still had architectural visualization at the back of my mind, and I did try to apply for a few interior practices as well. And this is what I thought I need to do next. So, as I mentioned before, I thought architectural visualization would be a great way to update my portfolio if I wish to go more in interior practices. And I decided to recreate interior photography in Blender. I started by looking at picture books that I have laying around the house, and I skimmed through this book on concrete architecture, and I found this Cliff House by Franz Silvestri that struck my interest. As it was very clean and minimalistic space, I thought it would be a good place where to start. Here are a few shots that I recreated from this book. I enjoyed doing it, but I thought I needed more than just one space that I have recreated. The next project is something I haven't really finished, but I will show you my learnings from this and outputs that I gained from this project. This is one of the unfinished projects that I have, and as many artists, yes, I also sometimes abandon some projects midway through. I kind of was struggling with the idea about architectural visualization, so I sort of got a little bit more stuck with furniture part while I was creating this scene. I also went through Blender Guru's sofa tutorial to learn how to model soft furnishings in a photorealistic manner, which again helped me to unlock a few other steps in my modeling knowledge. Here are some results of the unfinished project, but few actual outcomes that I got from this project was to create bottle tutorials as well as desk lamp tutorials. I will leave the links into the description. And while I was faffing with this project I thought I had to take a little bit bigger challenge modeling with low poly. This project took me way longer than I expected. Creative blocks start to set in at the beginning of the challenge. I completely fell off the time block I was supposed to get it done. I was struggling to get a job as quickly as I wished. I went to few interviews and some places took such a long time to respond. It really wore me down. But what was reassuring was few comments I received during my interview process. I received comments that implied that they were most interested in my most recent Blender work. It really helped me with my confidence. It really opened my eyes to actually how much can I learn in self-taught manner from YouTube nowadays. I came back from those interviews and I just squeezed in a little kitchen ISO scene for one of my interviews, which I will share with you next. With this little project that I squeezed for the interview, I learned to reuse the assets that I already had modeled before. The end result is quite average in my opinion, as this was first time when I was up against the time to model up the scene. This took me roughly 6-7 hours. It taught me importance to optimize my ways of working. And once I finished with this, it was time to come back to finish the bigger challenge. I came back with some confidence to continue and persevere when it seemed to not be working. I restarted this challenge from letter D, and later on in this challenge I discovered geometry nodes. This project was amazing in terms of the amount of the output I gained from this challenge. I created a base library for plant assets that I created, and I'm planning to reuse them in a future projects as well. And as I was finishing with this project, the next scene was already in my mind. As you can guess from the title of the project, it does reuse Wisteria from 36 Days of Type challenge. I really wanted to go ham with lighting on this one. I wanted to use light as a painting before I applied any materials. I'm really happy how this project turned out. I created new assets, I learned new ways of lighting a scene, and work with colors. I also started my material library, which I will cover in a different video. I definitely find this to be so far my best work. I did promote this project a lot on my Instagram account, but eventually it is time to move on and create new projects. While I was working on this project, I got employed in brand design agency as a 3D designer. I am glad that what I have learned in past 7 months have resulted in landing myself a stability. I definitely won't have as much time to do my own projects anymore, but I am going to continue creating and uploading here on YouTube. Next project took such a long time. I learned that I need to start to time my sessions so I am more productive. I really wanted to create a nice atmospheric lighting for a dinner date in Botanical Greenhouse. I took a long time to finish this one. This was a weighty project in terms of rendering settings for low lighting in a model itself, and rigged characters also increased the rendering times. I learned a lot about file organization on this one, mainly from my own chaos. I finally have learned to do more optimized ways of working, so I'm utilizing this learning into my future projects. This is how far I have gotten in my journey. I obviously took my time to readjust with having a full-time job now. I also won't be able to be here every week at first, but we see how it goes, and I might be back on weekly basis as well at some point. I hope to have more time to do this eventually, but I am grateful to have an experience to work as a junior 3D designer based on what I have learned in my air quotes spare time. I should caveat the spare. I was working in uni 2 days a week over this time. The rest of the time I was creating in Blender and upskilling myself. And you might have a few questions. What have I learned in this time overall in a Blender? I think I have learned good basics of best practices over this time. I am just getting better with timing my sessions. I will update you on that as I go. I have learned to turn my sketches into 3D concepts. I am learning to trust the process. There were points where I didn't enjoy those projects, but I learned to finish them at some degree. And another question you might ask is, what's next? Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, you probably didn't, but I will tell you anyway. I will continue making speed modeling videos, as it seems something you enjoy. I am continuing to learn about Blender, and I would like to share more of my little animations here on YouTube as well through YouTube Shorts. I hope to do more live streams at some point, but at the moment there isn't much of a time when I can do it. And obviously I do want to thank you, all 120 of you as of recording this, for your support. I am really glad to see this number growing by a small amount every so often. More content on my journey in 3D is developing. It includes a lot of different skills that I wish to develop and document as well here. Grow in public, as they say. If you are new here, subscribe to my channel, follow me on other socials, and have a good day.